Hello and welcome to this informational session on the licensing and practice of social work in New York State, sponsored by the New York State Association of Deans of Schools of Social Work and the New York State chapter of the National Association of Social Workers. I'm your host, Celicia Street, Communications and Professional Development Associate for the New York State chapter of NASW. Joining me today is David Hamilton, Executive Secretary to the State's Board for Social Work in the New York State Education Department. Also joining us is Karen Moran, Director of Policy for the NASW New York State chapter. We will be providing a comprehensive overview of the regulations related to licensure as a licensed master social worker and a licensed clinical social worker, including recent changes that were enacted in 2010. David, can you provide us with a little background on the regulation of professional practice by the New York State Education Department?
Sure, thank you, Celicia. The education law establishes the requirements for licensure in 48 professions. These include health professions as well as design and business professions. The law includes the requirements for licensure as well as the definition of the scope of practice of the profession. It establishes and restricts titles for each of the professions, and it also defines unprofessional conduct, things that are prohibited under the law and for which a licensee may be sanctioned by the Board of Regents if they engage in misconduct.
Okay. Can you explain to us why there are two social work licenses?
In 2002, the legislature and the governor enacted a change to the law to create the licensed master social worker and the licensed clinical social worker. The licensed master social worker, or the LMSW, is the entry-level license, the one that's required when people get out of school to practice in community organizing, management, planning, those types of functions, but also to be able to complete supervised experience toward licensure as a licensed clinical social worker. The LCSW is the clinical license, which is the one typically held by an individual who's going to provide psychotherapy and related mental health services. While the practice is restricted, the law does provide some exemptions, and these exemptions, for instance, allow a student who's part of a licensed qualifying program to get experience as part of their internship before they receive their social work degree. The law also requires that people be licensed to practice, while there are other exemptions, such as people who work in certain facilities or programs organized, operated, funded, regulated, or approved by state agencies like the Office of Mental Health, the Office of Substance Abuse Services, the Department of Health. Generally, an individual has to be licensed in order to use a professional title and to engage in those activities that are restricted under the law.
Okay. And Karen, can you explain in some general terms what it means to engage in licensed social work practice?
Absolutely. Beginning with the fact that you must now, since 2004, register to practice the profession. The license is valid for life unless revoked, annulled, or suspended by the Board of Regents. But you must also bear in mind that you have to practice within your scope of practice in a legal setting or entity, comply with laws, rules, and regulations, and understand that unprofessional or criminal actions may result in professional discipline.
Okay. And David, what are the laws that guide social work practice?
Well, since 2004, the laws, as we've said, define what a licensed master social worker or a licensed clinical social worker can do, the tasks that they perform. That's part of the education law. But there are other provisions of law that relate to the practice of the professions. The insurance law establishes reimbursement by third parties for psychotherapy and certain privileges. Or the public health law establishes the requirements for a licensed social worker to maintain records, provide patients with access to the records. The civil procedures or civil practices law sets out privileged communication so that when a licensed social worker communicates with their client, there's a reasonable expectation that that information would be kept as confidential unless that's waived by the client or unless certain other conditions are met. And then finally, there's the commissioner's regulations. The regulations, if the law provides the skeleton, the regulations sort of provide the meat and the flesh to clarify what's intended by the law. So if the law said you have to have a master's degree, the regulations might specify what the content is in that master's degree. So all of those things together become relevant and important for the licensing and for the practice of the profession.
Okay. Now let's get into the details of the requirements for licensure. Karen, can we start with the review of the requirements for the LMSW?
Yes, the requirements for the LMSW are pretty straightforward, actually. You know, obviously you have to earn a degree from a program that's registered with the New York State Education Department as qualifying for the LMSW or the LCSW. File an application and submit a fee, be at least 21 years of age and of good moral character, and complete pass the ASWB's master's examination and complete an approved 2-hour course on the identification and reporting of child abuse and maltreatment. Worthy of note, though, is since 2005, social work curriculums in New York State have encompassed this within their curriculum. However, should you have graduated prior to 2005 and not have the applicable course, you can access it on NASW's website and other approved programs from the State Education Department.
Okay. Now, let's say I'm a new graduate and I've been offered a clinical job at the place where I did my field placement, but I haven't had a chance to, I just graduated, I haven't had a chance to take my master's exam to get my LMSW. What can I do? Can I take this job?
Well, yes, while you were provided an exemption to practice in the field and provide clinical social work services as a student, be aware of the fact that once you graduate, that exemption no longer applies. However, there is a mechanism to take such a job and have a limited permit. You would apply for the limited permit through the State Education Department's website.
Okay. And what are the parameters of practice for the limited permit?
Well, once the permit is issued, the permit holder can engage in the practice of LMSW or LCSW. However, they must be supervised by an LMSW or LCSW.
Okay. When should a permit applicant apply for their LMSW?
What we typically recommend is that you can apply for licensure at any time. You have to apply for licensure before you need it. So we typically recommend that a student would apply during their last semester of graduate school. They can get the application and the money in with us. Then as soon as they graduate, the registrar of their program would submit verification that they completed the education required so that they can search for a job, say that they are eligible for a permit. So when they find an acceptable job under the supervision of an LMSW or an LCSW, they can submit the permit application, and that can be processed typically within a week or two so that they can start the job and start providing services to clients while they're preparing to take the examination.
Okay, excellent. We receive a lot of questions about what happens if a permit holder doesn't pass the exam within the 1-year permit period. Is it renewable? Can it be extended?
The law sets out the limited permit, which is really like a temporary license, so that you can practice under supervision. When the legislature set the provisions for these types of permits, they want to make sure that people who are under supervision and who are not licensed have the minimum time they need to be able to pass the exam, but not forever, so that there are time limits. In this profession, the permit's only valid for a year. It cannot be extended, it cannot be renewed. But in the course of that year, an individual could try the exam, could take 3 tries on the examination if they needed to. If they don't pass the first time, they need to wait 90 days to take it again. The waiting period is not a punishment, but it's an opportunity for them to go back, look at what they've done, how they performed on that examination, and study more and prepare better for the next examination so that they'll be able to pass that.
Okay.